Greetings. In this video, I am going to critique Jeremy Tom Zach, Kristen Mankin, and Chrissy Pondon's work from our class. I personally always think in terms of geography, so I find it interesting. I'll start with Jeremy. Here's from Wisconsin, as I am from Wisconsin originally. So always fun to see images from that place, even if they're images of people from that place. But then we'll go to Texas and Connecticut. I love geography, thinking in those terms. But anyways, looking at this image, seems pretty straightforward, sort of selfie-ish image. I do like how you kind of neutralize the background. It has sort of an interesting dynamic, all this one-point perspective converging off to your left, rather than a flat background. Seemed to add something, but it seems like pretty typical sort of portrait, and that's kind of what I asked for in that first picture. So if we move along here, now I can see playing with the filters, and we got pretty high contrast, black and white image. There's like a lot of energy in here. I also get the sense of like a camouflaged hat, and then we have this sort of natural-ish background with light, and there's a lot of energy here, and there's also like this sort of seriousness in your expression. And it's a selfie, and it kind of has that selfie persona. The thing I was thinking about earlier, for whatever reason, was is there a difference between the quote-unquote selfie and a self-portrait? Self-portrait seems so formal. But I think in many ways, his selfies are much more constructed, though I don't know. I was just thinking about that. I don't know. Anyways, so I kind of like the composition here and the high energy, and kind of feels a little bit like I get that Northwoods outdoorsy feeling of that place. And as of all the images, this is the one that really kind of struck me a little bit. We have this pool table, and this environment. But the thing that struck me was it feels like you're at home. But when I see this image and I think of Wisconsin, I think of tavern culture, honestly. Taverns, bars. I grew up in Douglas County, which has the most bars than any other county in America, I believe. I think that's what it is, the most bars, taverns, drinking establishments. And, I grew up in middle of nowhere, rural northern Wisconsin. There wasn't a big town within 15, 20 miles of me. But I know that within easily 5 miles, there are 3 taverns. And, so they're all out in sort of the middle of nowhere-ish. But so I saw this image, and I'm like, oh, it would have been so much more interesting had it been in a tavern, because that really connects to, my childhood and growing up. And then I was thinking there's a photographer, Carl Corey, who photographs taverns in Wisconsin, sort of diminishing tavern culture. And we think of drinking, getting drunk, and these sort of places, but the tavern culture is not necessarily about that. And I like how he says here, there's this whole culture of tavern that doesn't revolve around being drunk or over drinking. It revolves around the social interactions that occur there. They know that if they go there on Friday, the same people will be there, and they look forward to seeing those people. And I can tell you, I can think of several taverns and who, if I were to go there today, who I would see there. People from I went to high school with. I can kind of predict which tavern I go to or which people I would see. It's sort of a comforting thought. I live nowhere near that. But here I'm in the middle of Nebraska, and I know, like, hey, I bet if I go there, I could see this person right now. And I like how you kind of touched on that a little bit in your paper. You said you asked some questions here considering your own creative process. And you say one may ask numerous questions such as why even involve yourself in social media, and you go on to say, what is it I seek by doing this? Connectedness to a group or a sense of belonging, companionship? And in a sense, when I first came across this portfolio, that's what it was. It wasn't about drinking and getting drunk. Well, there's plenty of that going on in Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin. But it's more like a community center. You meet people there, you see people there. My dad used to take me to the tavern when I was a child. It's totally legal in Wisconsin. And, he might have a drink, but he didn't get drunk. But, it's more just a sort of social gathering and seeing people, talking to people, and connecting to the community. And here, ironically, this tavern isn't far that he photographed here. This is in Hudson, which is just a little bit north of you, I believe, Jeremy. So, uh, that was I found sort of interesting when I looked at this. I wanted to be in this sort of smoky tavern. I can even place it in a tavern that I been to. I know where friends of mine will go to. Make a great backdrop in here, but it's at this home, so it has this very different, feel. There's less of the social. I think of pools as sort of social. It takes two people to play it, and quite often they're in bars and taverns. But here it's just you alone, and it feels like in a home. So there's this little different feel, and I think I'd really feel very Wisconsin to me. I'd have been taken in a tavern. All right, and then this, image, black and white, and you're playing with filters. I don't know, but I almost want to push it like softer. It has this high contrast, but maybe you want that sort of dichotomy where you're sort of relaxing and taking a break from all the paper and the work that seems to be surrounding you. And then you're relaxing, and then this, I believe, is your portrait of who you are not. So it becomes sort of interesting, and maybe that feeds into that dichotomy that you're feeling where the posture of your expression is relaxed, but then the imagery is very high contrast and creates this tension in there. And then this, looking at who culture sees you as, or who a subculture might see you as, and exaggerating that. I'm not sure where I'm going with this or how I'm feeling about it. I am, there's this motion blur in the background. There's this, fellow you that's, in the middle of all this blurring motion, and you seem to have this energy and this positive attitude. It almost seems like a trying to create this energy, and maybe that's what it is. I don't know if this is your classroom, but the whirl of energy that we often associate with art in that creative process. Not exactly sure where you're going with it and who the subculture is you're thinking about looking at you as, but that's kind of what I get from it. So anyways, I would say good job. Look how you've explored it. And we are going to move on right now, and we are going to go look at Kristen's work. So, all right, Kristen, this image really jumped out at me. I'm going to try and go start back at the beginning. Yeah, 1C. I'm like, of all these things, they start with this image. And this is the one thing I find with Instagram. It's like not as easy to organize these sort of things, but like I said, I'm fairly new to this, but I decided to throw it in there because so many more people, younger people in particular, are on this platform. So I need to push myself and help push you folks too. We'll push each other. But that's one of the sort of weaknesses. But maybe there's a way to deal with this. I just haven't delved into it deeply enough. All right. Anyways, yeah. So here we have this, typical sort of portrait-looking images. Just what I asked for. I don't seem to get too much from it, other than there's this sort of identity of you. That's really what that's designed to be. I think I'd almost prefer like we stepped away from the wall and got a little blurrier and got that out of focus. Find it a little distracting, but the image is doing what it's supposed to do. So. I kind of like this image. I like how you integrate yourself within this environment. You almost just seem to be a part of it. as opposed to the focal point being you, though there are a lot of elements that do emphasize you rather than the rest of the environment. You're taking up about a quarter of it. You're fairly centralized, like all these two sticks point right at your forehead. Where the brain is, it seems to say something about me, and these flowers sort of become parenthetical and holding you in that image. I really like this photograph, and it almost feels like, it could be an album cover or something like that from the 90s image. This one, who you are not, and that idea of him being someone's personal chef, certainly. Feminist identity and women in the kitchen, that sort of BS, playing off that. It seems a little to me exaggerated and over the top, and I don't really know what I want from it. I think there's, I like the thought process that you have in there. It seems like something that could be pushing. I don't know if I want it more natural, or, you're like this lady who's coming at me with the spatula, which is in itself a sort of cultural creation, the stereotype, feeding off of the woman in the kitchen and angry housewife chasing a husband or a child or something with a spatula. And then your expression is sort of fits within that construct as well. I don't know. But then you don't have a cracked egg. So I don't know. It's interesting to look at all the visual cues here and read off and think about the stereotypes. And I'm not sure if this is like a great image or an okay image or what. I'm just trying to digest it here as I look at it. Yeah. So. When in your paper at the end you said, I think it's fairly clear that this set of photos was taken with the intent to be viewed rather than as a candid representation of my life, and that in itself contributes heavily to the viewer's perception of them and me. And I think you're spot on with that, because when I look at this photograph, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at someone who's constructing an identity, and it's not necessarily your identity, and that's really what you're doing. So I think that comes across very much. So, another way to approach it to make it feel more natural, if I think of the Cindy Sherman's Untitled film stills series, the housewife, I seem to remember there's a photograph of her in the kitchen glaring at the camera. So, and you take a little bit different approach. You're kind of like not trying to pretend that you're actually this housewife cooking dinner for whomever it is that needs it. So, all right. So I like this image, and I like your title with it too. So this dramatic camera angle looking up, and then your expression and a high contrast, looking out the curtains, it's sort of a voyeuristic image. I really like this photograph. It just seems to have a lot of interesting qualities, and it seems very refined in a sense. Like, it seems more refined than the previous, not this image, when we were just talking about this image. It seems much more refined, but I don't know if that's just that aesthetic. This has more of a modernist photographic aesthetic to it, where the other one seems a bit more contemporary, postmodern sort of in feel. So I don't know, but I like this image. I like this one too. There's a struggle that's communicated in this, but I like the simplicity of the composition. I really like the horizontal nature of everything, like this stripe, and you're just like another stripe, and then there's another stripe and another stripe. It's almost like an abstract, very abstract painting, photograph. But then, of course, within that middle stripe is the you in this tub, and then that integrates a lot of things. And then your, of course, titling of it, of Ophelia, has a lot of nuance and art history, and that really gets to the meat of visual culture, where an image can be engaged in a lot of different ways depending on the viewer's knowledge. Because now we're starting to go to Ophelia. Most viewers probably aren't going to pick up on that, but if you are with this understanding, and that's going to give a much deeper, richer understanding of what's going on here. But even without that, I get this sense of struggle in there. If I don't think about it, that I do get this sense of this water and the struggle. You're in there with all these, these clothes on, his hands and legs, and the head just above the water. And it just feels like almost an internal struggle. So I think that's interesting that you communicate that within this image, without even a viewer needing the rest of that. You get that. But if you do have that background, if you do have that cultural understanding, it adds even so many more layers of depth. And I started thinking, when we looked at these, there's a photographer, Connie and Bowden, and I started thinking about these images. And I had never associated the Ophelia thing. When I looked at these, I just kind of like these photographs and the depth and playing with the reflection and the figurative play. But tying in that Ophelia aspect, there, seems even more. I think it helps me understand these images more. So, that's interesting. But one of the things I really connected with in your writing was you said I've had similar discussions with another class about the myth of the American Wild West was created by tall tales and Western artists such as Frederick Remington and Charles Russell, and Art 21's Identity series describes photographers of that era sensationalizing their representations of Native Americans in much the same way. And I, of course, connect to that statement very personally because I did a whole body of work that, you sort of summed up with it, where, my Myth of the West series, where I wanted to go out and photograph places that the history collided with the contemporary landscape. Sort of evolved from that, and I ended up photographing a lot of my children's toys. But so these are contemporary tintypes. So looking at this contemporary world, but finding places where history and the environment collide. So there's a history of the landscape, and there's a contemporary element, and then there's this fake covered wagon. That's one thing I really connected with in your research thoughts. So anyways, all right, I think we need to shift on, move on, and we will look at Crissy Condon's work. We'll get to this one. Actually, I want to go the other way. We will start right here. And really like the portrait. It seemed to remind me of another portrait I can't quite grasp right now. But anyways, it feels somewhat both staged and somewhat natural, like the expression in the hands. It seems like caught in the moment. And that feels sort of natural, but then the made-up nature, the makeup, the nice dress, the painting in the background, all seems very considered. It's a very nicely constructed portrait, and I do like the painting in the background too. I'd like to see more of that. So I think that's interesting, and it goes beyond just a selfie. It feels a little less selfie-ish and more self-portrait-ish, more sort of formal. All right, and then this image is also, this feels more like a selfie to me than the previous one. I think I'm just sort of making up this distinction between selfies and self-portraits. Maybe by the end of critiquing everyone's work, I'll come up with some sort of formal definition for those or differences between those. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll just forget about it. All right, but anyways, this one seems more like something I would see, on a selfie Instagram sort of post. The dramatic lighting. I like this looking off in the distance, this environmental consideration, playing with the filters, this image has some pop to it, and it has some impact, and it tends my curiosity, like, what are you looking at there? So I like this image. I don't know where to go beyond that. And then here you're looking at who you are not, but we'll go to this one. This, I think, of all of these is probably my favorite image. I just like how you're sort of lost in this stuff, that daily grind. You just kind of merge in here with all these clothes and this sort of mess, and you just kind of like a part of it. And I think you almost could have pushed that a little bit further, like had some of these clothes overlapping you, like over your arms or something like that, legs. It could have even more merged because I kind of like, I don't know, I like it as it is too, but I think it could have pushed the message and idea even further. But just like it's just this jumble of stuff, and I can pull out your pieces and identify you. But that's not where I go first. Just like all this clothing stuff coming at me in this sort of pseudo-human form within there. And I like the weightlessness of it too. I like how your feet are, you're fully contained within the frame. And that seems important because it adds that feeling of this sort of weightlessness and this lostness within the image. So in your paper, you say, we are constantly bombarded with images that appear to represent reality, when actually we are viewing one side to a much richer and more flawed story. So, I like in this image, I sort of see that flawed story, but also see this sort of constructed element. Whatever way, though, I really like the photograph. Think about it academically in the end, I respond to it. All right, and then this image, here's who you are not, and I like your description there. And as you describe it, basic millennial mommy blogger pretends to be an irreverent hot mess while carefully cultivating an immaculate social media presence. I think you do that really well. You construct that really well. You're wielding the camera really well to communicate what you want, because I can see that, the message on the t-shirt. There's this element, there's this balance between the made-up elements and this seemingly on the go, gotta go get something done, this coffee in your hand, the sunglasses are in action, and you got the smile on your face, you're presenting this perfectness and this, you do a good job of balancing all that stuff. So you're wielding the camera very well. And this image seems very much constructed. And I'm not sure who we're seeing what the subculture is that's seeing you. I suspect it's like this artist peacenik sort of thing. Then we have this, this violence in the background. I kind of like the splatter created through paint and this very abstracted gun. I get caught up looking at that. I really like the framing, how you put your face fully contextualized within that frame. I think that seems really important. It becomes a sort of identity and emphasis in the identity and the framing of identity. I don't know if you deal with photography professionally, it seems more painterly from the first image, but you have this sort of intuitive understanding of framing and that sort of stuff. So the other quote that I found from your research I pulled out was, we now have more ways to connect to each other than we could ever have imagined, but we have to be aware that we are still limited by the nature of being human. It's so funny. We can experience so many different places. We can meet so many, quote unquote, meet so many different people through social media. But we always have this limitation of being human, and we're not perfect, and we make mistakes, and we make judgments, and we do mean things, and mean things are done to us. And so I really ultimately, I just kind of come to this conclusion with social media that we have to be just as careful with reading into that as we are in our personal lives. Like somehow we feel more like, I said something in another thread that we don't have, like, people feel that they can judge others on social media because they're not confronted with them face to face. And therefore, they don't, when they say those mean things, they don't have to worry about physical violence. They don't have to worry about seeing the person being offended, so therefore it's like at arm's length and easier for them to, say things that are kind of mean and bully people because they don't have that physical confrontation. But at the same time, I think we also maybe feel more freedom to put ourselves out there. An introvert can maybe put themselves out there easier in social media and express who they are in social media because they don't also have to be confronted with those physical responses. So it becomes sort of interesting. I thought that statement kind of related. Anyways, that's probably long enough. I'm going to move on.